When you expand your sphere of comfortable action by doing things that make you marginally uncomfortable, you get better at asking yourself and answering the question, what's the worst that could happen? When you see someone who's doing something that you think is really incredible, you can either build yourself up or tear them down to make yourself feel better.
Right.
And tearing them down doesn't do anything for you. It's an illusion. I think so many people run into this where they abandon things and they accept a partial completeness where they're like, my voice just isn't good. I'm just not good at X. And usually if you track that back, it's because a parent or a teacher or some authority figure criticized you really heavily.
Top 10, I got a top 10. Got my motivation high for my top 10. Gotta learn from the wise women and men all my life. Like na 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 na. For my top 10, top 10, top 10, na 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 na. This one's for my top 10.
Need motivation?
Watch your top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and this channel was created to help you overcome the #1 challenge that is holding you back, a lack of belief in yourself. You watch these videos because you know there's something more inside you too. You have Michael Jordan level talent at something. So get ready to ask better questions, don't stress about the outcome, and be fully committed with Tim Ferriss and my take on his top 10 rules of success to give you the confidence, motivation, and belief that you need. Enjoy. Okay, let's kick it off with rule #1. Ask better questions.
When you see someone who's doing something that you think is really incredible, you can either build yourself up or tear them down to make yourself feel better.
Right.
And tearing them down doesn't do anything for you. It's an illusion. And I'm blanking on who said this, but I think it was Carlos Castaneda actually, who said, whether you make yourself happy or you make yourself miserable, the amount of energy required is the same. And so it's like, focus on building yourself up. And the way you do that is by asking better questions. And the power of these questions is just incredible. So Peter Thiel, for instance, the first money into Facebook, co-founder of PayPal, co-founder of Palantir, a billionaire many times over. He's a repeat player. And Elon Musk also, the PayPal mafia is pretty amazing. But they've been hitting multiple home runs. And it's not, if you're looking at once is lucky, twice you're good, these guys are really good. And one of Peter's favorite questions is, why can't you accomplish your 10-year goal in the next 6 months?
I love that question so much.
And when you apply these ridiculous constraints, your thinking has to change. You can't just upshift one gear. You have to get an entirely new car to think about that, so to speak. And there are all sorts of other questions, like what is one thing you believe that other people think is crazy, which is a great interview question.
Rule #2, don't stress about the outcome.
Shaun White, two things that are very interesting about Shaun White. Well, there are a lot of things, but he holds the all-time record for medals at the X Games. He has, I think, 2 gold medals at the Olympics. And 2 things worth noting for him, and this comes back to the high expectations thing. Okay, so I asked him, what is your self-talk when you come out of the gate for a gold medal run at the Olympics? What do you say to yourself? And he thought about it, and the short version is, who cares? Short version is, who cares? I think this is a really big deal, snowboarding, going down snow in this contraption, but at the end of the day, I'm gonna go home, I'll see my family, which he borrowed from Agassi. When Agassi sort of had his comeback, that was how he took the pressure off in very, very high pressure situations, was to say, who cares?
Rule #3, fully commit.
When you're considering an opportunity, an invitation, maybe a prospective hire, could be anything, could even be an entree at a restaurant. If you want to ask the server this question, it actually works really well. Rate it from 1 to 10, you can't use a 7. And I've been using this pretty much every day since I got this explanation from Kyle, because he said the 7 is a very slippery, kind of non-committal, semi-cool value that he found corresponded to things he felt he had to do out of obligation or guilt or fear of missing out. One of the greatest ways 5 years from now, 10 years from now, to end up in a place you're really unhappy with is to let those be your drivers, right? However, if you take 7 out, 6, you can't justify doing a 6. That's a barely passing grade. So that's a no.
Yeah, so it turns a gradient into a binary decision.
Turns a gradient into a binary. And I've been using that for all sorts of things now.
Rule number 4, be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
I think that positive thinking is overrated. So what I mean by that is, or let me phrase that a different way. I think positive thinking is necessary but not sufficient. So what I've noticed, and this is very common, for instance, in the meditation world, you'll see people. I've met some tremendous meditation teachers, and some of them defy this description, but they're outside of the action, right? So they're at a monastery. They're somewhere very with minimal inputs, and they're the picture of patience and calm and so on. But I've seen some of those people
all day long.
Exactly when you throw them into the front, onto the front lines, and people are telling them to f off, and they're honking behind them, they lose their shit. Yeah. And I think that you need to make yourself uncomfortable. So if you have and that's why in the 4-hour work week, these comfort challenges are so important. I mean, and they seem silly, but there's a very transcendent or important benefit that you get from, say, going into a Starbucks and laying down on the floor for 20 seconds and not saying anything to someone and then just getting back up. And that's a comfort challenge. Most people do not want to do it. And they'll do that and they'll get up and they'll be like, wow, I was so nervous about that and nothing bad happened.
Nothing happened.
Exactly. And when you expand your sphere of comfortable action by doing things that make you marginally uncomfortable, you get better at asking yourself and answering the question, what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
And you realize, not much. Like, really, I've done all these other things I thought were going to be these horrible experiences, and I was totally fine.
Sure.
Great. So let me try A, B, or C that I am worried about.
Right.
Or was previously worried about. So I think that you have to inoculate yourself against fear by exposing yourself to fear. It's the only way. It's the only way you can do it.
Also, if you want to have more confidence and self-love, check out my 254 series. They're free. The links to join are in the description below.
Self-love is not an indulgence. It's not a nice to have. It is a prerequisite. A lot of the anxiety that we feel is actually due to using words that are not defined very well. If you are trying to make high-level decisions, focus on time-consuming, high-priority projects.
Rule number 5, journal.
Morning pages we should talk about. Julia Cameron describes them as spiritual windshield wipers. And the way I would translate that is when you do morning pages, and you might just be complaining, like your lesser self, your worst self coming out on pages, just bitching and moaning, is you get that out of your system for the day. So you don't have it ricocheting around your head like a stray bullet for the rest of your waking hours, interrupting everything else. You just trap it, you freeze it on paper. And that practice has been tremendously liberating. Not only from a well-being standpoint, but from just freeing up my CPU so that I can focus on things that are more important. Because if I have all that, like, God, that guy and the dad and the dad, like I should have said, like all that bouncing around all day, it's like you have antivirus software just slowing down your, why is it so slow? It's like, yeah, because you're thinking about these stupid grudges that you're holding against people for trivial bullshit. Like, who cares if the guy at Starbucks bought the last thing of cashews, you idiot? Like, Ferriss.
Deeply troubled.
Yeah, like Ferriss pulled together. So if I get it on paper, though, I'm like, okay, I've dealt with that.
Rule number 6, do unto yourself as you would do unto others.
I read something recently which has really stuck with me, and I've been repeating it to myself a lot, which was from Gertrude Stein. Recently, something that she wrote, and it was paraphrased. Very simple. It related to the golden rule. So for those people who need a refresher, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. All right. Her point is it has to work both ways. So do unto yourself as you would do unto others. And so if the voice in your head is a voice and a tone that you would never use ever with the people you care most about, don't use it with yourself, and train yourself not to use that voice.
Rule number 7, learn how to automate and delegate.
I'll tell you how I look at this in the simplest form. And one of the frameworks should sound familiar if you've read the 4-Hour Workweek, 80-20 analysis. I will look at, and I do this in fact, instead of, for instance, New Year's resolutions, I do a review of my entire calendar, previous year, week by week, for In this case, we just came into 2018. I'll look at 2017 and I will make a list, in fact, 2 lists of the 20% of people and activities who produced 80% of my peak positive emotional states. That's one list. The other side, the 20% of people or activities that produced 80% of my peak negative emotional states. And it could be as simple as frustration. And what this will help you to put together, it doesn't have to be at the end of the year, is a to-do list or a to-focus list and then a not-to-do list. All right. And I tend to focus on, these days at least, taking disagreeable tasks or distracting tasks and first trying to automate them with software, auto pay, whatever it might be, right? A repeating schedule with a TaskRabbit, for instance, for physical pickup or anything like that. Perhaps you do that through a UPS store that scans and then emails your documents or Earth Class Mail. Use technology whenever possible instead of brute force with humans, right? Even if there are humans involved in conjunction with the technology. So I'll try to automate as much as possible first. Then, if we're looking at delegating, which frequently includes technology, again, I'll try to remove the negative as much as possible, especially with repeating tasks. That is the lowest hanging fruit. Then, I will look at my primary projects for a given period of time. And if you have, let's just say 4 or 5 projects you could pursue or that are in play in your life, I will narrow it down by asking which of these projects, if moved ahead to the next milestone, or if completed, will make all of the rest either irrelevant or make all of the rest easier. And I've done this, in fact, recently in the last week. Then we have a primary focus. This is the lead domino that will make everything else easier. I will throw as much at that as possible. So let's just say hypothetically, we are trying to design a website. In some cases, you want to throw money at a problem. It doesn't have to necessarily be a lot of money, but throw money at a problem instead of time. Time is non-renewable. So I will say, go to 99 Designs and get 50 different submissions to brainstorm ideas for a potential website. Hire perhaps 2 firms and have them all at the same time working on designs so that I can save time and move this project ahead as quickly as possible with as few stops as possible. If, for instance, I need a legal opinion, all right, well, I'm going to look for a consensus. I'm going to look for gaps to be filled by different people. I will very frequently have 2 or 3 people work on that at the same time and then gather their responses. Again, just to quickly review, the not-to-do list based on the 20% of activities and people that tend to produce 80% of my negative emotional states. And then the to-do list based on looking at your list of projects and identifying the project that will make the others either irrelevant, unnecessary to do, or easier. That is the lead domino, and then I throw as much as possible at that, which does not need to cost a lot of money. And certainly for me has not cost a lot of money, even when I was, I'm not going to say in the poorhouse, but really, really scraping by on very little. You can still find ways to do it because there is talent both overseas, domestically, and there are many different types of software that can help you to smooth out and simplify process to make them much more elegant.
Rule number 8, believe that you can improve.
Being a good student is a coachable skill, and I gave up on so many things in life, whether that was basketball. I concluded I was bad at languages in 9th grade, and so on and so forth. And I think so many people run into this where they abandon things and they accept a partial completeness, where they're like, my voice just isn't good. I'm just not good at X. And usually if you track that back, it's because a parent or a teacher or some authority figure criticized you really heavily. And it turns out that if you just get a better toolkit, sort of a better set of questions, that you can do things that seem impossible to the untrained, right? So you could teach someone to, say, memorize a shuffled deck of cards in less than 60 seconds with about 2 weeks of training. Like, you literally using the right software, you could get someone past the former American record in 2 weeks or less. But you show that to someone and it looks like a Rain Man-like skill, but it's all coachable.
Rule number 9, outsource.
Let's just take personal outsourcing as an example. I can't do it, I have a boss, I'd get fired. Okay. First of all, I don't distinguish between work or business and personal time, in so much as if you're misspending that time, whether it's on household chores on the weekend when you've put in 80 hours from Monday to Friday, or checking email to simulate forward motion as opposed to defining your measurable objectives, those are both wastes of time. So if you have a job and there's absolutely no way you can apply outsourcing that job, which we can question in a second, that still means, let's say your son has a birthday party on Sunday, he wants the equivalent of this season's Tickle Me Elmo, which is impossible to find. Rather than spending your entire Saturday going from store to store over, let's say, a period of 5 hours to find the toy, you could call or email Ask Sunday, go to asksunday.com, and for $40 to $50 a month, have 30 inquiries. This would be one. You call them, you say, here's my zip code, call every toy store within a 10-mile radius, find this toy, make a reservation or purchase it using my credit card, and have it held behind the counter. Call me when it's ready, tell me where to pick it up. And that would save you 4 to 5 hours.
And rule number 10, the last one for a very special bonus clip, is use the batching technique.
What is batching? To explain it in simplest terms, we can talk about laundry. All right, so you wouldn't do your laundry every time you have a new pair of dirty socks. You wait for a certain critical mass of dirty laundry to accumulate, and then you do the laundry. Why? Same with the post office. If you have many different types of mail that are going to come together that you need to mail, you're going to wait for a certain critical mass as opposed to just going there for every single letter, because there's a setup cost. There is a task switching cost, getting in the car, driving there, spending the gas, spending the time, laundry, putting it all together, detergent, and so on. Right? So the time and labor involved in doing one letter or 20 or one pair of socks or an entire basket of clothing is the same. And you want to be both effective and efficient with your allocation of resources, i.e. time. If you apply those to business, you can apply them in 1,000,001 different ways. And I'll give you a few examples. One of the most common, I suppose, directional questions or specifics that I'm asked about is frequency. Well, do I batch on a daily basis? Do I batch on a weekly basis? Do I batch on a monthly or quarterly basis? And the answer is I do all of those things. But you don't have to try it all at once. And I would not encourage you do that. I would encourage you to perhaps try 1 or 2 approaches and see what works for you. This is a very personal set of techniques. You develop a portfolio that works for yourself. Let me tell you a few things that I and others do. For instance, you might decide that on a given day, from the time you wake up until lunch is your primary creation period. This could be writing, it could be recording, it could be anything that is proactively creative and synthesis. Then, once you have lunch, you are permitted to do administrative tasks, phone calls, email, triage, calendaring, and so on. I do this quite a lot, particularly from Tuesday to Thursday. On certain weeks. On a weekly basis, I know the CEO of a very well-known startup, pretty much everyone watching this would know this company, and instead of batching on a daily basis, looking at his week, Monday to Friday, he might have day 1, administrative tasks, day 2, HR hiring, day 3, product, day 4, marketing. And on each of those days, he will focus on thematically or categorically those types of tasks. That is yet another approach. And very commonly, I will batch phone calls on Mondays and Fridays. And I would say even broadly speaking, this is voice-related tasks. So I will have phone calls and podcast recording on Mondays and Fridays. And this helps to prevent also interruptions and task switching that can result if you have miscellaneous phone calls and podcasts scattered throughout the week. Makes it very difficult to do deep work on anything that might require 3 to 5 hours of uninterrupted time. On a quarterly basis, you could look at batch producing or completing certain types of normally scattered activities. For instance, I am recording this video right now during a content generation week, where a week is blocked out once per quarter to focus on answering common questions that all of you or my readers or listeners have asked, and so on and so forth. On a, say, 6-month to yearly basis, I have started in the last few years batching travel. Why would I batch travel? And there are many different reasons to batch travel. One of my reasons is that I want to practice being off the grid for extended periods of time to not only remind myself and prove to myself that it is possible to do that, and no, the internet will not stop, the universe will not end if you are unavailable and unreachable for certain periods of time, and also to rejuvenate, to recharge, being away from social media and keyboards, laptops, screens, and so on. Batching is one of the fundamental concepts that you need to understand. If you understand the principle, the reasons for it, the concepts, you can come up with your own examples to experiment with. And these are not permanent changes. Think of them as 2-week experiments. One tiny thing that you can test, assuming that it's on a daily or weekly basis, and try it out. See what works. Keep what works, reject what doesn't, add what is uniquely your own, borrowing from Bruce Lee with that. And before you know it, you will have a reliable, dependable way of making yourself more effective and more efficient, which is your bespoke iteration of batching.
Now I have a special bonus clip from Tim on how to know when to use your yes and your no that I think you're gonna enjoy. But before that, it's time for the 3-point landing questions. Let's go from just watching the video to taking action. Here we go. Question number 1, how can you use the batching technique in your calendar? Number 2, what projects do you have that you really should be outsourcing? And number 3, where do you need to believe that you can improve? And if you made it this far in the video, I want to celebrate you. Give me a hashtag believe down in the comments as well.
Focus on what categories to say yes to or evaluate and what categories to say no to, so that it's not one-off yes or no, 1 to 10 without 7. Instead of making a million one-off decisions, like categorically. For instance, speaking engagements. I basically do no speaking engagements that aren't going to give me something evergreen I can then share with millions of people. So for instance, it's like tonight I'm going to be on stage and I'm going to interview Terry Crews, and that'll be recorded.
You can use that on the podcast.
And that'll go on the podcast. But getting up and giving the same talk to small groups of people over and over again, I basically stopped doing all of it. I really don't do that anymore. Because as seductive as it is, and there's money to be made, I found it wasn't getting me closer to my personal mountaintop, right? And for those people who find themselves maybe procrastinating or saying yes to a lot of 7s, there's a commencement speech you have to see. I'd be surprised if you haven't seen this, but there are a million commencement speeches out there. Neil Gaiman's Make Good Art is so good, and you can find it online. It's very easy to find. But Neil Gaiman, who's just the uber polymath of fiction writers, the guy does everything. And he has the most hypnotic voice imaginable also. Go watch Make Good Art, that commencement speech. And I just realized that a lot of these categories can be eliminated altogether. And if it's scary to eliminate them, you just make it a short-term trial run, right? So maybe saying, I'm never doing speaking engagements again for the rest of my life, that's too much of a commitment. That's more of a commitment than even I want to make. For this year, maybe that's too big. Okay, let's try for a month. See what the fallout is. Like, no matter how appealing something seems, just say no for a month, and then we'll reassess in 4 weeks and see how you feel.
If you want to see the top 10 I did on Tony Robbins, check out the video right there next to me. I think you'll enjoy it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
Getting things is not going to make you happy. You want clients for life, not just customers. They want you to supply them more information. He never thought through an exit strategy, and he got almost nothing.